Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today, we have a very special guest, Shaun Pinner. And the reason we are here today is that we've recently passed the 3-year anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. We've seen some radical changes in the US position over this issue, including a very shameful UN vote on the 3-year anniversary date. And we're here to kind of take a look at what's going on today. We're looking at whether Russia is anything worth defending, if there's even a possibility of having some sort of a reasonable relationship with it. And Shaun has a direct experience with Russians and can talk about it from his personal and direct experience, unlike many of us. Here, he's a former soldier of the British Army. He joined the Ukrainian Armed Forces as a contractor, and he fought during the Russian invasion of Ukraine. During the siege of Mariupol, he was captured, sentenced to death in a show trial by the Supreme Court of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic, a separatist entity, and he was freed in September 2022 in a prisoner exchange. He suffered torture and he was stigmatized by the Russian state media, propaganda and smear campaigns. So we'll discuss all of that and whether any of this information should be taken into consideration by Western makers when evaluating their position on the conflict. Shaun, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'd like to, before we go into more recent events, kind of discuss how you ended up in Ukraine to begin with after serving in the British military. What are the events that brought you there, and why Ukraine of all places?
Well, it's a good question, really. I served 9 years in the British military. Around 2018, I'd come out of another relationship and was really looking for some more purpose in life and a sense of belonging. And some of the best times I had were in the military, with a rucksack and no money. And I didn't have to worry about money. I'd run 15 years in a hazardous waste business. I'd had some successes, failures, but I did quite well. I had an apartment. And then a friend of mine was working in Mariupol and said, how do you feel about teaching and helping Ukrainians develop their military after the annexation of Crimea and the invasion of East Ukraine? So I sort of late 2017, I made a decision to go and went sort of early in 2018. I sold my flat, sold my apartment, sold all my belongings, car, and just went to see what Ukraine was all about, and sold my business. And I really went down to Mariupol and didn't go home for 5 years after that. I stayed and experienced a brilliant spring and summer in Ukraine. There's no place like it. The people were amazing, and I didn't really understand the political situation at the time as much as I do now, but I went with a solid background of actually 9 years in the British military, learning how to fight Russians and knew all of the tactics, hardware. And in my former job there was 2-4 mobile reconnaissance. And I'd had some specialist training in SEER, which is survival, evade, resist, and escape training. So I've had some capture training. I also went to Bosnia in the early 90s, so I experienced war and did 2 tours there, and I worked with counter-terrorism operations in Northern Ireland for 3 years. So I got experience with background in war, and I thought I could really get back into a job I liked, and went down to work with National Guard in Mariupol, and after a selection process, 3 of us got taken on, and out of 12, and I didn't go home for 2 years. I had the best job in the world on the beach at Yurivka and Mariupol, and I eventually met my wife in Mariupol. She was a deminer and working on the front lines, and so I'd had, I've started to build my life in Mariupol. We eventually got a house, and I paid my taxes in Ukraine. I got my residency and had to really transfer to the Marines to work a 3-year contract to get my full citizenship. And I didn't think that was a fair, bad exchange. And then I joined the Marines and became one of the first internationals to really command a position on the front line. I passed all aspects of parachute training and jumped as a Ukrainian soldier. I got promoted and became a section commander. And, it was really I was moving through the ranks quite quickly in the Ukrainian military because of my background in the British military. And by the time the full-scale conflict came around, I'd been living in Ukraine for several years and became a section commander with my Marines unit, and a community built up around our relationship. So we had family community. My parents came over to Ukraine, got married in Mariupol. So I was essentially from one of the sort of internationals that came to Ukraine with a good solid background as a Ukrainian soldier before the full-scale invasion. And that's really how I ended up there, my life there with my Ukrainian family.
What was the experience of serving like, and what exactly were you doing while you were serving? What kind of missions were you doing?
Well, for the first 2 years, I was a sniper instructor in National Guard, including work with Azov, which is public. And obviously, that came with its own problems. I knew what Azov was like. However, it did come with a Western stigma because Russia had a very good propaganda
Mm-hmm.
on Azov, which therefore I was saying, you've got to fight this. And they went, no, we want people to be scared of us. But that had really a double-sided sword, really. So, it was largely down to Russian propaganda that stopped the funding to them. And, I'm not saying, there were some extremist views in places. It's in every army I've ever been in and seen. There are those elements in there. But to say that, in the heyday in 2018, there was only really under 2,000 active servicemen and women in a country of 40 million. So even if you did go with the Putin narrative that, Azov are all Nazis and Ukraine's Nazis, I mean, to have a reflection of 2,500 active servicemen and women to a country of 40 million saying everybody's a Nazi, I mean, it's just ridiculous. Also, I learned Russian first because of the geographical location. I didn't really know Russian or Ukrainian, and it's fair to say that most people spoke Russian in Mariupol, and that was really a byproduct of colonialism, really. And Russians don't really understand Ukrainian. So my wife's from Crimea. She spoke Russian, Ukrainian, and English. But many Ukrainians who identify as Ukrainians obviously speak Russian too. So, another narrative that's quite popular is Putin came to save the Russian speakers. Well, essentially, I was a Russian speaker from East Ukraine, just born in London, So, he didn't save me or my wife. So I learned Russian first. And then really, when I left them working as a sniper instructor for 2 years with National Guard, I really went to the Marines, and that's really where a military career kicked off. Like I said, I became a section commander, did the beret test, did my parachute jumping, did 9 jumps, 4 combat jumps, 1 night jump as an airborne Marine. And I was then largely pushed into positions on the front line and promoted quite quickly because of my experience. I mean, I was well past my prime, but I was still keeping up on the runs and doing the exercises and completing the tasks. And I got the nickname Stary Sobaka, old dog. So that sort of stuck. And in any military, Stary person in Ukraine, and in any military, you get a nickname you're in. So I sort of fell in love with Ukraine, the people, the guys I'd worked 5 years with, and largely on the operations on the front lines. This was when Mariupol came out in 2022 and the full-scale invasion. This was my 4th deployment on the front line, 2nd as a section commander. And I could speak a bit of Russian too, which helped, because it's fair to say before the laws changed where, it wasn't like they outcast. There's a lot of false narratives and false, disinformation saying that Ukraine just, outlawed the Russian language. That's not true. They reintroduced the Ukrainian language, and generally, the laws changed with government institutions in the military that you had to really learn Ukrainian. But I'd spent 4 years learning Russian because it was just easy to do, and I was learning a new language. I could write, but now I've got to learn Ukrainian, which I've got no objections against. It's just it made life a bit difficult for an Englishman in the east of Ukraine who's just been learning 4 years of Russian. So it was very difficult to work in the barracks sometimes because everything was conducted in Ukrainian. So that was slightly difficult to get to. But like I said, the only country I've ever been persecuted by for speaking Russian is by Russia. They stole my house, killed my friends, so tortured me, put me through a sham trial. I still speak Russian in Dnipro, so I want to sort of eradicate those narratives. There's no issues there, me talking Russian, and so apart from that, really, I just did a lot of training with the guys and it improved their basic infantry skills, and which I loved for 2 or 3 years before the full-scale invasion.
So how did you end up in Donetsk, and how did you end up getting captured there?
Well, I was on a routine deployment. I'd got deployed at Pavlopil, which was about 25 minutes east of Mariupol, and I'd been there previously the year before as a section commander, could manage the position, but this year we were going under the cloud of the Russian invasion. So this was my fourth deployment on the front lines there, and this was after 9 years. I did 13 years in the military. And this was my 9th war tour. So the longest time I spent in the trench on the front lines, it was 9 months the year before. So, it's pretty difficult when you go to these places and you have to go through all the weathers, all the seasons, and then you spend, 9 months in a trench with a 2-week gap where you can see your wife in Mariupol. It's pretty difficult on the family life. So I knew I was only going to do 3 years. I couldn't keep going and going and going because of my age. So it was about just getting through that contract, and then I can get my citizenship, which I thought was a fair exchange. And unfortunately, in the last 6 months of my 3-year contract, Russia invaded. So it's sort of a bit unlucky in that respects. But I think most infantry soldiers generally want their 13 hours in Benghazi, their longest day. Old war films where they can show what they're worth. I think, Mariupol came round. Plus, I was ready for it. It wasn't a surprise. We'd known about this for months beforehand, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the invasion. Even my wife said, no, it will sort itself out. And we're just like brothers that argue, which was quite strange for me to hear when a country's just annexed Crimea and invaded East Ukraine, that people still thought that Russia was our brothers. And I didn't quite understand that. I would say, no, it's definitely on now. It's going to happen. So I was really trying to convince everybody else that it's going to happen. My military knowledge of 13 years told me it was definitely on. And we just had to wait for the day. And then when the day finally came, it was after 2 weeks of heavy bombardment, and technology had changed. The drone technology had changed on the front lines, and suddenly it wasn't just quadcopters, and now they had thermal and they were able to drop munitions at night, and there were Russian drones coming over. So it was, we knew a couple of weeks beforehand it was definitely on. And then on the 24th of February, it was just really 4 o'clock in the morning. They came across the border, and it was all guns to the positions, and that's where it started. It was intense shelling and shock and awe, and Grad being a real they use that all the time. Grad, I mean, it was just grad all the time. Rockets coming in, and Dushka, AGS. I mean, it was hell. I'm surprised how we got off the first day of the invasion without any sort of casualties. I mean, the amount of money that an ordnance they fired at us, I'm just absolutely baffled how when we got to our BTRs to get a bit of a respite and pull back, that we still had all our platoon, which was crazy.
What were those first few weeks of combat like? The beginning of the attack.
It was very, very the most hard combat I've ever experienced as a soldier. And I, been in three. I've been to Syria, I've been to Iraq, I've been to Bosnia, and I had some experience, but this was just a different level. I mean, the shock and all. We were now the Taliban. You know, we were the guys that they had complete air superiority from the start. So it was
Mm-hmm.
very difficult to really combat that. It was just we had to hold the positions and slow them down. And my years of knowledge in the military knew we'd fight them in Mariupol, but essentially it was about slowing them down, drawing resources, and hold up the advance of the Russians for as long as we could. So we spent 7 days fighting back to Mariupol. Before I was told to dig in at Illich Steelworks, which is at the north part of Mariupol, and Azovstal was down at the south near the Azov Sea. But I had my house near Azovstal, which was kind of, weird. And I remember after 7 weeks of fighting towards the end, around sort of the first weeks in April, I was sort of seeing my whole area was up in flames and bombed. And, by that time, Russia had encircled us in Mariupol, 250 kilometers deep. So it was a pretty bad time because all our air defense were knocked out. We were running out of ammunition, water, and food, and the fighting had come into about 30 meters. So there were, Russians were the other side of walls, and tanks were coming into the steelworks, and we were just it was hand to hand distance. So we carried on fighting for as long as we could. And, the drone and the artilleries and the constant bombardments of the planes just meant we lost 60% of our company. And our platoon pretty much was decimated. There was only a few of us left. We got told around sort of the second week in April that we would be really looking to break out or surrender. We were told I opted to break out and try and get back to friendly lines or to another location because the position had become untenable and Russians were all around us. So we just thought we'd try and break out. And some guys surrendered, and but I got captured about 2 hours outside of Mariupol when we got given the order that we could break. That I later knew was President Zelensky had said you can either negotiate a surrender or try and get back to friendly lines. So we tried to get out. Unfortunately, I was captured by DNR, Donetsk People's Republic's militia forces, Russian proxies, just outside Mariupol, and that's really where my prisoner of war time started.
So tell us a little bit before we go into your personal experience about GNR, their relationship to Russia, and what their militias are like. Who do they draw from, and how do they operate, and what's the military relationship to the Russian forces?
Well, they're not. They're Russian. At the end of the day, they just had a name, the Donetsk People's Republic, but they were Russian. They were controlled by
Mm-hmm.
Russians. When I was captured, I was initially captured about 2 hours outside Mariupol, but you can spot them. They don't have matching camouflage, not the full Russian fatigues, and they're a bit look like much like a militia as you'd think. They don't look like professional soldiers. Most of those guys are scratching around for equipment and kit. And so when I got captured, the first thing they did was start stealing things off me, watches, belts, and anything valuable, anything that looked good, my lucky hat and stuff like that. So they were already taking things off me when they captured me and started stealing my cargo belt. And, so I was already sort of being mugged would be the best way as I was getting captured. And then I was handed over to Russian regulars who looked completely different identification colors with the tape. And they had fast helmets, good AKs, good optics, gangster grips, matching camouflage, all Russian fatigues. And it was a totally different look. And I thought FSB or Spetsnaz, first of all, and it was literally, I thought, I'm in shit here. And then what happened then was one of them just literally stabbed me in the leg. And then I was taken somewhere with them for about an hour and a half, where they electrocuted me, beat me, tortured me with a taser, stamped on me. All the while I was bleeding out of my leg where they would kick it and beat it, and mentally painful. But then they then handed me back to the Donetsk People's Republic and took me to Donetsk, where I spent the next 60 days just eating bread because they told me I wasn't entitled to food anymore. So I got there. They gave me some food when I got to my isolation cell, and then I was put in an isolation cell for several days. But after the first couple of days, they just stopped feeding me, and then next thing I knew, I'm just eating bread for 60 days. So and that's really, the starvation's probably the worst, to be fair. Excuse me. The starvation's probably the worst, to be fair, because the system-induced pressures that are there at the start. Generally, you're quite busy, being pulled out. You don't really get time to think, and when you do get a chance to sleep, you sleep. But once the hunger kicks in, and that's everything at the black site was really designed to torture you, and so the light was on all the time, 24 hours a day. No window in the isolation cell. There's a buzzer to wake you up and a buzzer to put you bed. You don't speak to anybody. There's no one there. Then they're playing heavy metal music on a loop. So that's really loud to stop. It stops you hearing all the screams and the pain and the artillery and the bombs that are going on outside. And nobody explains to you the rules, so you get beaten up quite a bit until you understand the rules. And not many people could speak English, but I had the weapon that I could understand a bit of Russian. And as long as they knew that, they might talk freely in front of me. So I thought I may be able to get information. So I kept that to myself. Just sort of saying that I was an English guy who can't really speak any Russian. But I was electrocuted there on the ears too, which is immensely painful. But by the time the trial came around in sort of June, I was moved to another prison called Makivka 97. So I went there, and it was a little bit easier to deal with. But I realized they were just gonna, because I looked in such a bad way, they were just fattening me up for the trial that came about, which was just crazy, because we went through some really heavy propaganda with Russia Today, and they're an intricate part of the intelligence and the military. They're part of the actual torture setup, the trial by public opinion, where you get pushed into propaganda talks with their journalists who are calling you a Nazi, and did you bring weapons over from the UK? And this isn't ethical journalism. This isn't non-biased reporting. This is telling the whole Russian public that I'm a Nazi and a mercenary before I've even gone to trial. So it's very hard. I had training in that, so I knew how to handle myself in front of a camera, and what to say, what not to say, how to project myself, what to show, push back a little bit, create some pushback, so it wasn't all them pushing on me. And so I was able to do that quite a bit in captivity, and have some barriers, some boundaries I wouldn't cross. Like, I wouldn't sing the Russian national anthem in front of a camera for you. I'm not going to do that, because the easier you are in captivity, the more they will push on you and jump on you, and because they can get you jumping through hoops and doing anything you want. So the idea is you gotta take a few hits and mitigate the dangers of that. But you have to take a few hits to really eventually be left alone. But I was pretty in a bad way by the time we got to trial and got the death penalty, and I looked like I'd been in a Japanese war camp by then.
Because of the starvation?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, one of the physical problems you have to overcome is your physical deterioration. I went from 84, 85 kilos I normally weigh to under 60 kilos. So I was like, my back would go into my legs. I had no bum anymore, and my elbows started to protrude because the skin fat had gone so tight, and the fat from my body had gone, that you could see the bones really protruding in my elbows. And also, one of the things that happened is your nails, when you don't get fed anymore, your nails go really super thin, so they create a lump with the last bit of food you had. So I was constantly having that, and your skin, because I never saw daylight for really, unless I was doing propaganda, for 60 days. So I was stuck underground in a cell 1 meter by 3 meter with two Ukrainians, and then later on a Moroccan who was out there with the Ukrainian Marines. So I was stuck in with, underground for the large part of the time. So my skin went like white and crepe paper and really wrinkly because it had no fat, no water. And the water we did get was really just technical water from a well, or, it tasted of chlorine and bleach one day and then diesel the next. It had little wiggly worms in it, and it comes in all shades of yellow. So it wasn't exactly, clean water, but you just have to deal with it. There's not much you can really do. So every couple of weeks I'd have dysentery, or I was sick because just the water was so bad. So when we got to Makivka, 97, that prison, it got a bit easier. We were put all together then. And then we were just really being fattened up for the trial.
Did you get any medical treatment while you were there?
No, on the black side, they did stitch up the wound, the knife wound the Russian gave me in my leg, and gave me an injection for that. But there was no follow-up or cleaning or antibiotics or anything like that. Could have gone septic, for all I know, and which is really bad. But yeah, there was no follow-up, no bandages, no cleaning. I didn't get a shower for 3 weeks until I was in. And when I did get my first shower, I was beaten. So, and I just, the only time we did start to get some medical treatment was when we got to Makivka, and a nurse would come round once a week, twice a week, and just make sure we were still alive. But the dynamics changed because when I got the death penalty, obviously another English NGO was beaten to death in the prison cell next to us. So the dynamics changed, and he got taken to the prosecutor's office. He lived in the next cell, and when he went to the prosecutor's office, they just beat him senseless, and he died of his injuries 2 days later. So there was a lot of commotion and a lot of protection for us at that point, because somebody had really messed up, and they killed him in the prison. So it was pretty bad time, dark time, because by then it was getting to July and August, and we were waiting for an appeal to our death penalty, and just wondering if this was our last day that we would be shot. And we met other people that were telling us their stories. We had 200 come from Olenivka, and they were telling us, one guy was telling us he was electrocuted on the testicles, and another guy was telling us he had it on the ears like me, and one guy was waterboarded. Another guy was hung on a hook for 12 hours. All of us looked emaciated because we'd had no food and living off bits of bread and things like that. So the only time you can really get food is when you go to like do propaganda, and maybe you can get a cigarette or a burger and try your luck. But generally, we were just all skinny and emaciated. So it was really tough time after the court case and the trial.
Who was with you in the cell? What was their background, generally speaking?
In the cell, what, daily life?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, in the black site where I was there for 60 days, there's not much you can do. You can't build a rapport. You're stuck in a room for 1 meter by 3 meter every single day. So you
Mm-hmm.
might get pulled out for interrogation or camera work, but you're back in that room with the same guys. And nothing happens at the weekend. So from Friday night through till Monday morning, it's pretty monotonously boring, and you run out of things to say, but there's nothing you can do apart from sit in a room with the same guys. I mean, it's like, imagine sitting in a broom cupboard with
Oh,
you and two other people for 60 days, near on 2 months. I'd see how you get on just living in a broom cupboard, because that's basically what it's like. You sleep, eat, talk, go to the toilet, and you're waiting for the next bread. The bread would come down 10 o'clock every morning, but that's the only meal you get, a little bit of bread. So you're sort of really trying to keep your mind active. So you're thinking about home, you're thinking about shopping runs, walking routes, food, what you're going to make. Then you might talk a bit about movies, things like that, what you're going to do. But you have to be really quiet because there's a camera in there watching you all the time. So you can't do physical exercise. If you do that, you'll get beaten. So you can stand up or sit down, and that's it. And no sleeping through the day. So it was pretty intense. And one time I had to do like a forced stand against the wall for what seemed like about 12 hours. I mean, it was so long. I was just trying to keep my eyes open with my head on a wall, bent over, and I was just really in a bad way. And I actually got really sick when we got transferred to the other prison at Makivka. So I got sick quite. The first bit of food I had just sent my stomach nuts, and I got really sick with dysentery. So I had to get some medical treatment for that. But it was very barbaric medical treatment. I mean, it was like if they could give you diclofenac for everything, they would. So, it was like, oh, your back's bad. Here's diclofenac. Oh, you got a bad belly. Here's some diclofenac. It was just a nurse really just giving out what she thought was medicines. It was pretty bad. I was told there was a doctor there, but I didn't. I probably saw him once in 3 or 4 months.
That's crazy. So what happened with that British guy who got killed? Did you ever know who he was, or?
Yeah, I talked to his mum, and his name's Paul Urey, and he was a British NGO that was working out there who just got pulled up, captured by the Russians, and just happened to take. He had no military background. He didn't really understand the situation he was in at all, and struggled to deal with things, and didn't really. The guards didn't really warm to him too well. So, he attracted a lot of trouble from the guards because he couldn't adjust. And unfortunately, he didn't need to die. It's just terrible to lose anybody. But, he's, there's not much you can really do about it. But we just have to keep going, remind everybody to keep going and keep surviving.
So with those propaganda events, did you have an option of refusing to participate?
No, no, no. My hood would come off and there he'd be there sitting in front of me. I think maybe once out of 17, one journalist said, would you mind signing this form? But behind her are the two guys that beat you up in the prison, so and give you all the electric shocks. So there's not much you can really do
Sure.
about it. It's you're sort of like I said, being captured gave me a good insight into how that side works and operates. And, Russia today is much complicit in the torture of prisoners, civilians, and, soldiers, as the guys who are beating you up. So it's just like, and the guys that electrocute you. So, I mean, it's like my personal vendetta now to really tell people about how that works out there, and how they're really, the media really controls where if you're guilty, even if you're not guilty, the Russians don't use torture in the way people see it in the movies. People
Meaning
think,
what?
tell us what you need to know, otherwise we'll electrocute you. They will torture you anyway, whether you tell
Hmm.
the truth, whether they what they want or whether they want not. But what they want to do is they're not interested in the truth you tell. What torture's really good at doing is getting you to admit to places you haven't been and get you to admit to things you haven't done. And that's
Hmm.
how they use torture, because then really you're in the system. They wouldn't let us plead not guilty at the trial. So, in when it goes up the chain, what you have is all that, is off Putin. When he gets called to welcome, he said the guy pleaded guilty. He doesn't tell him that you were stabbed, electrocuted, beat, starved, tasered. They don't mention any of that. They'll just say Sean Pinner said he was guilty. Of course, I mean, it's not my problem. But that's already you're already guilty before you've even gone to trial. So, and you're loaded up with the media first, and then once the media's had its bit, then you go to trial. That's all loaded.
Hmm.
I didn't get a statement taken. No defense lawyer came to me in prison that took a statement at all, or even had one meeting with me. So, it's all garbage.
So let's talk about the trial and the actual procedure. What were you was everyone who was at that location on trial for something, or was it just you and a couple of other people?
No, there was Aidan Aslin and the Moroccan were on trial with me for terrorism, mercenaries, and being a Nazi, pretty much. And well, the truth be told, that I've never actually set foot outside the country. I had legal status in. Already told you I was married,
Mm-hmm.
lived in there, paid my taxes in Ukraine, had a contract with the military. Just because I got a London passport, I was branded a mercenary. Yet I was earning less than $400 a month. I could get more for being a bin man and rubbish man in the UK and working on minimum wage than I could for being in Ukrainian military. I was out there because I love my wife. I wanted to stay out there, and it was actually quite good money for the area we worked. And and I'd been living out there years before the invasion, so I wasn't brought in specifically for the full scale invasion. So I was actually a Ukrainian soldier and passed all their training, and they knew that, but they still wanted to project me to their own people as a mercenary. Even though I'd never left the country, I had legal status in. So it's very hard to take. I mean, I wrote the book now because, you know, while I was captured, I had a narrative. They had a narrative they were forming about me. And I was unhappy when I got back. It was like I was looking at the news and it said mercenary. Near British papers would say mercenary or soldier of fortune. And I was like, that's not fair. That's not me. So it got me quite angry. So that's one of the reasons why I wrote a book about my time in Ukraine, just so I could get my point of view across. That I wasn't just somebody that went over there to fight. I'm married to Ukrainian. I learned Russian. I worked with the military. I had a house. I paid my taxes and lived out there for far more years than I lived in the UK. So it's no. I think this day and age, plenty of people live in countries they weren't necessarily born in. So people just seem to struggle with an English. Why would an English guy be living in Mariupol? Why would he be in the military there?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's no different to many other countries that do it, even including Russia. So I just never came set foot out of the country. I had legal status in. So it was fair about fighting those narratives that Russia had pumped out about me and those lies and really to counteract that now. And I've done quite well at that over the last 3 years now.
Why do you suppose British publications picked up enemy propaganda and used those narratives?
It's a good question now because we've had some British guys taken in the last months, and straight away the same newspapers were mercenary, soldier of fortune, captured English mercenary caught in Ukraine in Kursk area. I had to remind them that if they didn't pull that down, I would report them to IPSO, and they really should learn the definition of mercenary. And straight away they were quick to come back and say, look, we'll change the wording, we'll take it down. But they're the same people that do it, and it's already out there for 2 or 3 days before you see
Mm-hmm.
it. So they just want a headline capture. Most of the journalists, some are ignorant and don't actually know what a mercenary is, but some of the papers are aligned with, Russian propaganda, pretty much that sort of tilt in the UK, which is really, really dangerous because I've seen the other side of it. I've seen how much it's governed and how much the lies and how much words can make a difference. And, I was tasked as a mercenary and they wanted to kill me and sentence me. And they went to the extent of putting me through a death penalty. Yet, it's just I'm only here alive now because they wanted Viktor Medvedchuk, which was the guy who would have taken over from Zelensky if they had been successful in taking Kiev in 2022. So, if they hadn't wanted him, I don't think I'd be here. I think I'd be shot. So, um, you know, that's what you're dealing with, Russia. So anybody wants to defend that, I have no idea. I have no idea why America and Trump want to even talk to Russia, let alone make a deal with them. I mean, I just watched them slaughter over 25,000 predominantly Russian-speaking Ukrainians in Mariupol, including women and children. They take POWs, behead them, and the execution rate of Ukrainian POWs isn't going down; it's going up. Sorry, up. So we've got to, you know, I don't understand. He's an ICC indicted war criminal. He's clearly invaded Ukraine. So, you know, my personal view is that I never liked Trump anyway. I was never an optimist of Trump. I would never say that. I think he's a disgusting character. And now, unfortunately, he's Russia. He's just repeating Russian propaganda and Russian narratives. You know, calling Zelensky a dictator. And Zelensky said, "I'll leave the position if we get a good peace deal." I'm not. He's never given the impression he's wanted to stay on after the fight. I think he'll probably want to spend some time with his kids and his wife. So it's incredibly upsetting to hear, Trump just repeating Putin's narratives. And now you've got the situation where, America, the bastion of freedom and democracy, champions and the president of the free world, not anymore. Not since the UN Charter. Now they're allied with Russia, North Korea, Sudan, Belarus. Something's not right there. And it's not for me to get involved in how people vote or American politics, but I will say my piece about the actual truths that are happening in Ukraine and fight the blatant lies that are coming out of the White House right now, because it's really dangerous. But now after this weekend with the anniversary of the full-scale invasion, and over the last week or so, you've seen the demonstrations, and that's all over the world. We just had 7,000 people turn up at Trafalgar Square in just London. Yeah, Glasgow, Edinburgh, I've seen, Spain, Chicago, Washington. These are people all around the world that are now starting to pick up and understand what Trump's about, that he is a liar, and he is spreading disinformation. He can't even get the budget right of what he's spent on aid to Ukraine. I mean, he's like not a little bit out, he's 200 billion out. I mean, it's like, it's ridiculous to hear when you hear military aid being around 70 billion to Ukraine, and Trump's spouting 350 billion. And you just think, man, nobody knows if he's just, well, I think he's stupid, but nobody knows if he's just stupid and then you realize when he starts being direct that Zelensky's a dictator, then you realize it's Russian propaganda. It's absolutely Russian narrative. It's all to do with shady deals that are being behind everybody's back with more shady men to make them rich. It's so obviously shady deals being done everywhere now by America. It's not the America we knew or the America I was growing up with, because Ukraine, if they did, they'd understand Ukraine loves Americana. My boss had Harley Davidson tattooed on his arm and rock and roll on and drove. His nickname was Harley because he rode a Harley. So, if the truth be told, Ukraine is very conservative in its values. USA should be supporting Ukraine because it's exactly like many of them want. It's a beautiful country, West-leaning, great business and IT capabilities, streets ahead in some way of the UK. So much is a good investment, Ukraine. And to hear what Trump's saying is just incredibly sad, really.
So you know, at the time when all of this was happening, you were in trial. Did you ever have any access to a lawyer? Were you able to communicate back home, whether to your wife or your family in the UK? Was there anything?
I was used in. They wanted to draw Britain into the war, so they made me ring a lot of government departments, and I was able to talk to my mum to get my local MP involved, Foreign Office. So they used me for a month's worth of phone calls and propaganda where I could speak to family, but it was strictly controlled. They videoed me while I was doing it. I was scripted and told what to say. Wasn't allowed to talk about the areas or where I was being housed. I wasn't getting any food, and I was getting really frustrated because I couldn't tell them nobody's feeding us. So I had to put different. And then they would go back and analyze these videos and then come back to me a few days later and talk to me about points of these videos. They heard me talking and they played us tricks. They made me ring up Ada Naslin's mum and he would ring up my mum to confirm stories were happening, if stories were true, and it was real nasty stuff they were doing. Um, Even to the point where we were made to do, videos to Boris Johnson and with threats of our fingers being cut off if we didn't sell him and tell him we were scared, and so it was intensely dehumanizing, and there's not much you can really do about that. You have to get some what we call small goals, small wins, which can be anything from not being beaten up as bad as you thought you were to getting an unexpected food or a chocolate bar or something that keep you going, a cigarette. So those wins, you have to look deep for them sometimes, and keep your mind focused, positive, and moving forward.
In the videos, was there any possibility of sending some sort of a signal that you were being cursed into these, uh, comments, or, you know, do any sort of small gestures that would indicate you're not behaving the way you normally would?
Not really. I was taught how to do that in the British military anyway, so I would try and show my injuries, not make myself look very good. And I was trying to get on TV as much as I could to tell people, how I was and the situation I was. And I think when I got home, when I was exchanged, my mum said, when I saw you at the trial, you look dreadful. You look like you've been in a Japanese war camp, and I looked, really, really, really bad. And you won't probably recognize me now compared to then, but I just was so skinny, and because they just weren't feeding us. Nothing you could do about it, but it's just you know wouldn't feed us. But you can't really get any subliminal messages out.
So by the time it got to the peak of the trial, what was the situation like? First of all, what were they trying to get out of these trials? Were they trying to get some sort of, was it just a psychological pressure against the West? Were they trying to get ransom from the British? What was the
Well, it's quite clear straight away they wanted Victor Medvedchuk, so we did a lot of appeals to get him exchanged and us on the prisoner list. So
Mm.
it was quite obvious they wanted something. And when you realise you've got some value, people, your positivity goes up quite a bit. So, there's thoughts you could get out. So, yeah, I mean, it was quite clear they wanted somebody at the start, and eventually later on we knew it was Medvedchuk.
So what happened when you found out that you were getting the death penalty? What was that like? Did they just come into your cell to announce it? Did they bring you to court?
They brought me to court, and then it was done over in the courts, and then I had to wait 30 days for a letter, which then said, yeah, you have capital punishment and the death penalty. So nicely typed out in English, and then I had to just sit and wait for an appeal. So I had 30 or 90 days to make an appeal. I can't remember how long it was, but yeah, we did. Then we made the appeal, and then we just had to wait for that. And by the time the appeal came round, we were exchanged.
Hmm. So what was it like leading up to the exchange?
Same, it was monotonous, boring. Didn't even know we were going to be exchanged when the day came round. We were just sort of getting ready to sleep for the afternoon and try and get through the day. And then they just said, you're going on a long journey. And that was it. It's first we knew.
So they didn't tell you where you were going on the fact that there was an agreement to exchange.
No, we sort of thought something like that was happening, but we had no idea. But once
Hmm.
we got on a journey to Rostov-Don, we were beaten very badly, and we had to spend from 3 o'clock in the afternoon till 10 o'clock in the morning on the back of a truck in what's called stress positions. So it was immensely. We had no food, no water. We were spent tired, beaten, and by the time we got to the airport, we didn't really know until the doors shut on the plane that we were going anywhere. And when the doors shut, they told us we would have a medical, a change of clothes, you can wash, but we're now going to Riyadh, and none of us really understood what it was going. And then he said you were part of an exchange, and then we were really ecstatic and happy that we were going home.
Why do you think they did these things right before they were about to exchange? Was it just the last bit of psychological and physical sadism? Was it to divert your attention, to ensure that you were compliant and didn't cause any problems along the way, or a message to the West? What was the purpose?
I don't know. I think it's more of the guards at the black site would always do the transport, and they were unpredictable. And on that day, they came to pick us up, and they just wanted to give us a goodbye present. So they beat us senseless. I mean, it's like there's no human rights in Russian prisons, really. It's ridiculous to think that if you're in a prison, you're stuck and you might never get out. So there are no human rights, and you can't go. There's no in England we have the Police Complaints Commission, and there's nothing like that in Russia.
Sure.
And anybody championing these things. I mean, England and the UK isn't great, but anybody championing Russia is just ridiculous. To be fair,
I mean,
you know.
it seems silly to bring up the Geneva Convention at this point, but it's clear to me from what you're telling me that Russia doesn't care about its own prisoner of war in Ukrainian or other, prisons, that they don't care what happens to them either.
No, but they're quite happy to put it in the portfolio to say they've adhered to the Geneva Conventions and then get signed a book saying you've been adhered to the Geneva Conventions when you've been stabbed in the leg, tortured, beaten, starved. I mean, they use it like they know about it, but they're using it as all. I mean, it's just everything is criminal there. I mean, everything is criminal. I mean, it's just how anybody. It's like they want to tell the person above them the thing he wants to know. So if that means they're going to torture you and I've got to sign this document and things, it doesn't go down, it goes up. So
Mm.
people just think the guy above them wants to, he wants to hear about you being beaten up or tortured and fabricated. I mean, it's just corrupt as hell. And yet I've had a taste of it, I've seen the other side of it. So I try and tell as many people as I can, that anybody you really want to be careful about if anybody who's really championing Russia.
And were you able to remember the names of your captures, any of these people?
Yeah,
Oh,
we've got two or three of them. Yeah, we've I was managed to me and Aidan have managed to identify several of people that captured us. Some key prominent people too. So it's really important to remember people's faces when you're in
hmm.
captivity.
Y- were any of them sanctioned or end up on any sort of list afterwards?
Well, I think the judge that actually gave us the judgment was actually assassinated. I think he was still alive, but I never checked to see if he died. But he was in a serious way, because the Ukrainian embassy told me when I was back in the UK. So,
Yeah.
and it was all in the papers. So, there is karma.
Um, yeah. Did you ever think about filing a lawsuit against DNR or Russia or any of these people?
We've done that already. We've got the verdict we wanted. This landmark case, really.
Mm.
Be the first individual to take a state to court. We're looking to enforce that verdict through the British courts now, which would be amazing. But it's a slow process, the courts, so we just have to see how it goes. We will use probably the money from stolen, seized assets, Russian assets. Then, and to be honest, if we're lucky, then we're successful, then it will open the door up for many who have been the victims of war and Russian aggression. So we're hoping it will be successful. There's two or three cases now opened up about it, so it should be interesting.
That's that is really fascinating. I'm curious about that case. Once you filed it, what was sort of the response from, the those authorities? And was there any kind of interesting information that came out that is maybe worth highlighting for people who are not
Not
familiar?
really. At the end of the day, it's we there was no Russian representative that would acknowledge or turn up to the court case. So
Mm-hmm.
and also, we still got to enforce it. So I'm thinking that's gonna be the difficult part, and I'm not sure what form that's going to take at the moment.
But when did you receive the verdict?
Last year, towards August time last year, so we're still waiting. September, so we're still waiting for the. We've had the judgment, but it's one of the busiest courts in Kiev, we're told. So we're still waiting for the judgment, and then we can proceed in the UK court.
So what happened once you were released, once you got out of that truck? What happened immediately thereafter?
When I got home, it was all about reintegration, really. For me, it was quite simple. I slept like a baby the first night, and slow integration back into life, and eating proper food. And I had to put like 30 kilos to put on before I got to my normal weight. So,
Oh my gosh.
so I had some fun doing that, to be fair. That's great. I could just eat pizza, burgers, and red wine, not have to worry about it the next morning. It was great. But generally, it doesn't take very long to get back on. And then psychological wise, really, I'd had some training. I understood about the element of captivity, but we're still dealing with friends in the war now. We just lost friends, last month. So, people at my wedding, 60% of the men at my wedding are now dead or in captivity. So, there's quite a lot of guys there that are just still in captivity 3 years on. So I don't know how we're going to deal with it in the future, um, and how whether it might manifest. So I'm always watching for signs of PTSD. I don't drink a great deal. So and I definitely don't have the money to do drugs, so that's for sure. So I try and watch what I drink, and I don't really smoke, and I keep fit. So generally, I'm in good shape. I've still got on my digits and my fingers, so and I'm just getting on with life.
Mhm. So what did you end up doing after you returned in terms of, you presumably retired from the military?
Yeah. I've got a problem with my glasses. I never wore glasses before Mariupol, but I was blown up with my train IED and suffered flash burns and problems with my eyes. So I've got to wear these for close-ups now, and which is a bit strange, but that'll be a legacy of Mariupol. I've got a problem with my back still that I need to fix, and my left shoulder needs ultrasound from the stress positions, and to have a test there. And so I'm still fine. Plus, it takes a bit longer to repair 51. So, I'm no spring chicken. So, I now work with Prevail, keep Ukraine in the public eye. I do a lot of work with the military now, but as a contractor or job by job, and talk about my time in captivity. And I've written a book about it, which is very therapeutic. Live, Fight, Survive, about my time in Mariupol. As I said, I was so angry at how the narrative was formed around me that I wanted to get my story out. So it was good to do that. Now that's being picked up for a film too. So
Oh, that's great.
uh, yeah, so we could be making a film. Somebody's found it interesting and thinks it could be good. So hopefully by the end of this year we'll have an idea of when it'll be made. And so I'm just living each day as it goes at the moment, talking about Ukraine, and raising awareness of what Russia actually is.
Are there still Western volunteers joining the military now, or has that interest subsided after the initial year and a half?
Well, unfortunately, yeah. Probably 99% of the people we get that actually come are no good. They don't have any skills. They don't speak the language. They don't integrate, and they're gone within 3 months because they haven't fit their war in, or they've had no expertise, or yeah. So then they bring all their warrants and drug problems and things like that with them. It's a real magnet for real people that don't have any skills or anything to offer Ukraine. They come and think Ukraine's going to save their life, and they bring all that problems with them.
Oh.
But for the 1 or 2% that do bring over, they're really good. They fit in. The guys work with special forces. Guys come over, and there's talented combat engineers and tankies, and real good experienced guys come over, and you don't hear from them because they're doing the job and they just get on with it and love it, and not in the public eye, and they're the best guys to know. And then you've got the volunteers that come over, which without the volunteers, this war, I don't know how we would have functioned. I mean, they're the silent heroes, from people knitting dolls to raise money in the UK, through to people driving in cars to the front lines and drones. So there's a real mix of volunteers, a big network of volunteers raising money for Ukraine. Uh, and I've done a bit of that myself, raising £5,000 for stretcher beds and for Kherson Regional Administration. So, it's everybody's doing their bit for Ukraine, and it might not feel that Ukraine has support sometimes, but there's so much support people in Ukraine don't see. So I go to talk to them about that and where I've been and what I've done, and I run a speaking class. Well, I don't run it; he runs it, but I work with a speaking class in Dnipro, where I go and talk to them about what's going on in the outside world, and they're trying to learn English. So there are about 25, 30 Ukrainians walking around Dnipro at the moment. It sounded like a London gangster. So it's like, yeah, it's quite interesting when we try and talk to them about, use, not so much grammatical, but what's good on the streets and daily use. They're very interested in that, really.
I think that's wonderful. I wish in the US we got to hear more from people like you, because there's been a lot of Ukrainian defenders over the years, but mostly they were political types. They were,
Yeah.
ambassadors and all sorts of activists, and but not really people from the front lines or just regular Ukrainians coming in and
Mm.
talking. Not anyone with direct participation, and also not even a lot about on the humanitarian side. Like a lot of the anti-corruption experts, political, geopolitical advocates, and those sorts of people. And unfortunately, that did not have a very long-lasting effect, and didn't particularly make a great deal of impression, including on the administration. You can hear it, by the way. The arguments that they use, if you can call them that, are very generic. There's no
Mm.
specificity. It doesn't sound like they've actually talked to anybody, other than the leaders in Ukraine. They haven't talked to actual people or Westerners who fought and who've had their perspective. It seems like they're only exposed to broader narratives, not to any humanizing perspectives. And I wonder if you ever thought about trying to connect and have meetings and talk about your experiences more directly.
I do conventions. I've just been to Lithuania. I talked to various conventions. I do it commercially too. I go to UK and talk to the military there. I talk to civilians. I've been to the automotive club to talk about my time there and in Ukraine, so they can understand it more. And so I do a lot of talks in those areas. I mean, I just did a podcast with Adam Kinzinger last year, who said the same thing. He said, to most Americans, you'll be the first Ukrainian soldier they've ever met. So, I was talking to him, and he was saying exactly the same thing. And it's about time. But what you don't see is these guys that push the false propaganda. They don't want someone from Ukraine in with them. So, we need to get more people from Ukraine arguing those points about Maidan, because they don't hold up very well when you get an American talking, who's pro-Russian with his theories, who's never even been to Ukraine. When you put a
Exactly.
Ukrainian, you get a Ukrainian in front of them, and they just tears them apart, because you can't beat the truth when it comes to someone selling a book, or taking a Russian stance who's never even been to Ukraine. So that's what I do. We've noticed the information space has got smaller. I'm able to talk about, actually, I speak Russian. Actually, I lived in Mariupol. Actually, I was one of a handful of guys that did live in East Ukraine before the invasion. Actually, we're not all Nazis. Actually, they killed 25,000 predominantly Russians, but over probably 80,000 if it's conservative estimates. So and the fact that I was there, nobody can argue with that. So they're like, but no, but you're all Nazis. And I'm saying, no, I live there. I fought there, lived there. That's a Russian narrative. And many people are just quite shocked then that, that they've succumbed to this narratives that Putin was working on 2 years before the full-scale invasion, spinning those things about Azov. And when I tell them, actually, Azov only had 2,000 active servicemen and women, less than that. And they're like, really? I thought they had like hundreds of thousands. And you go, no. It's like, the Russians want you to believe that. They're just projecting all this shit. And, So I'm able to talk online about that. And my following's gone up because when I got out, I had nobody on Twitter and I was in the military, so I wasn't on social media.
Sure.
Now I've got like 40,000 followers on Twitter because I report on the ground in Ukraine, and again another 20,000 on Blue Sky, and another 10,000 on Instagram because I just report from the ground. Factual stuff was actually real and what's not, and people generally like it. They can pick it up and go, he knows what he's talking about. He lives there and he's doing this. So and that's picked up a lot of followers because of that. And it's building and building. And then a book and a film will be a great medium, which Ukraine doesn't have yet, to go out into mainstream film and talk about Mariupol, and which would be fantastic. We're still working on that, growing, and I think we're winning back the information war slowly.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very important. I hope you have an opportunity to talk to American audiences as well, besides, to officials, actually, to decision makers. I'll be sure, of course, to share this video with anyone I know, but it needs to be heard
By
more
all means,
broadly
yeah,
here in the US because that's where the problem is, not only in
it is.
Lithuania, not even in the UK, but definitely in the United States. This is the front lines of information warfare.
Absolutely.
Definitely. But thank you so much for sharing your perspective, and thank you for the valuable service you've been doing both in the kinetic field, but also now in the information space as well. Um, and I hope you have a chance to get the actual restitution for everything you went through. And uh, by the way, I'm sorry to ask, what happened with the family of that poor fellow who ended up getting murdered in prison? Did they also?
Yeah, they sent his body back while he was in prison. We heard from his that his body had been repatriated once we got exchanged, so we knew he was back. And I talked to his mum now, so
Were they able to also file a lawsuit or join in on the lawsuit?
we're working on it. We're a prototype, a pro bono case, a test case. So if we're successful, I'm sure they'll be straight in afterwards. And it was heavily reported here that his
Sure.
body had been beaten badly. So you know, um, yeah, so they will go down that route once we get a decision.
Yeah, you may find it very strange, but there's actually not been a lot of reporting in the US side on the Westerners and others who've been tortured to death or otherwise
Mm,
killed outside combat zones. So there is a perception that this is just another regular war and people, and that Russians are fairly normal people, despite
mm.
all the massacres. They just don't perceive the complete brutality and the fact that this is not a normal, territorial dispute. It's not just a matter of drones attacking one another, that people are getting tortured and killed, and there's this element of brutality and um they don't spare you because you happen to be from the West, and
No.
presumably nothing good would happen to even those people should they for whatever reason end up in the hands of the pro-Russian militias or groups and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. No. It's
There's
so
this.
imperative that everybody in America starts to understand this. And I
I
think they
don't.
will do. It's just going to take time. I mean, Putin had 2 years to prep for this. So some people say 8 years he's had to prep for this. So, it's going to take some time to claw back that information space.
By the way, what you mentioned about people being beheaded, this is absolutely ISIS style type of attack, and I think it should be said, and that comparison should be drawn quite clearly because some people still believe Russia is on their side when it comes to terrorism, even though what you've just discussed is the method that terrorists actually use.
Mm. Oh yeah, it's very ISIS looking. The whole setup for the videos, the cameras through to projection online, out through the Telegram channels. I mean, it's ISIS-esque. It's dreadful. I mean, I try not to put those videos online, but certainly tell people about what I've seen. And it's disgusting, and it's going up, not down. So the murder of Ukrainians and is just shouldn't go unpunished. So
I think it would be very effective to use hashtags like Russia is ISIS because they are literally doing the same thing. And it seems to me that people don't get that somebody can be terrible without being just straight out an Islamic jihadist. They could use the same methods, even if they look like you and
Yeah, yeah,
and appear westernized.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's dangerous times we live in, dangerous times.
Hmm. Thank you so much for sharing this. And for those watching the Washington Outsider Report and the Coalition Radio, we were talking to Shaun Pinner about his experiences joining the Ukrainian military formally and not just as a mercenary or one of those people who were just looking for, an adventure for no reason and got tired of it and then got out. No, it was a very committed journey, and it was a powerful story that reveals that what we are seeing in the headlines talks is only a superficial coverage of what is actually going on, and what we are witnessing is an absolutely war, not just on Ukraine and Ukrainians, but on anybody who does not side with Russia and does not pledge full support to Putin personally. I think it's very obvious that the war is against everybody who is not in that specific space, and I think people should stop perceiving it as as a proxy conflict and understand that they themselves would be targets soon enough in
Very
whatever
much
way
so.
possible. Thank you so much for joining. We'll be back next Tuesday night, 9 p.m. as usual.
Thank you, Irina. Goodbye. Thanks for
Have a
having
good
me.
one. Mhm.
See you. Bye.